When you try your best but you don't succeed. When you get what you want but not what you need. When you feel so tired but you can't sleep. Stuck in reverse. And the tears come streaming down your face. When you lose something you can't replace. When you love someone but it goes to waste. Could it be worse? Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you.
Running. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today and to have Dr. Silver invite me to come and to speak to you. It's always a joy to kind of share some of the things that we have, and it's about medicine as a whole. We're in a wonderful, wonderful profession, and at times, you know, we get down on it because, you know, of all the struggles and the payments and the insurance companies and the rules and the regulations. But if you step outside of it just for a second and all of a sudden you don't have any of that stuff, it really makes you realize why you went into it in the first place. And the beauty of our profession is that you really get to put a hand on another person's shoulder and help them when they have a need. And because of that, it is really a symbolism of love. You know, love is a funny thing. People are comfortable with it, talking about it in songs or reading it in poetry. But in our everyday lives, we get a little queasy about it. But love, by definition, is self-sacrifice. Love is a decision to make somebody else's problem your problem. And that's what we do in medicine all the time. We put our hand on another person's shoulder and say, don't worry, you know, we're here for you. And I think in that simple transaction, we accomplish what we all need in our lives. It's that to love and to be loved. And I think that I started to understand that a little bit better when I had this opportunity to do it. And life is really a contact sport. Ken Cragen wrote about this. He was one of the guys that architected the We Are the World thing. And he started to understand that, but intuitively we all understand it. We meet somebody who introduces us to somebody who introduces us to somebody else, and then something happens. And if you reflect back, you realize it. And I always understood that, but I didn't know exactly where I learned it. Now, I grew up, as Les said, in Palisade, New Jersey, right by Palisade Amusement Park. I was one of 12 kids, second oldest of 12, good Irish Catholic family. My people used to say to us and say to my dad, "Are you Catholic?" He'd say, "Yes, I'm a practicing one." And, it was really a situation where in Fort Lee at the time, there was Irish and Italian. That's what the makeup of it was. And so if you had 12 kids, you always had a family priest that kind of adopted you. And I can remember one day this family priest, Father O'Brien, told me about a situation that reminded me of exactly that life is a contact sport. He said that one day a kid came into the confessional in this Irish neighborhood and he said, "Bless me, Father, if I have sinned. It's a month since my last confession." He said, "I've been impure with a young lady." He said, "Patrick O'Malley, is that you?" He says, "Yes, it is, Father." He says, "Well, before I give you a penance, you tell me who the young lady was." He says, "Father, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to destroy the lady's reputation." "Was it Mary O'Brien?" "Father, I'm not going to tell you." "Was it Susie McGillicuddy?" "Father, I'm not going to tell you." "Was it Maureen O'Sullivan?" "Father, for the last time, I'm not going to destroy the lady's reputation." He says, "And marry you steadfastness. Go off, you say a rosary, you be a good fella." He said, "Thank you, Father." Got out of the confessional, he gets into the pew, his buddy kind of weasels over to him. He says, "What did he give you?" He said, "3 good leads." So life is a contact sport. And, keep your eyes open. You never can tell when the next one's coming. But the reality is that everything that we do in our lives is not because of ourselves. It's really because of so many factors that surround us every single day that create that opportunity for us. And I think that if you really take a look at it in life, there are no ordinary moments. Most of us never really recognize the most significant moments of our lives when they're happening. Because it's an instant, it's a flash. And then you gain access to somebody, and all of a sudden you come back to it. And so that was exactly what it was for me. Now, I was a young plastic surgeon. I'm still a young plastic surgeon. Forget the 35 to 40 years he was talking about. We only met about 20 years ago. And the real reality is that I was given an opportunity to go to the Philippines with a guy named Bill Riley from Houston, Texas. They had an organization called PhilPlast at the time. And I was given this opportunity to go. Now, I wanted to become better at doing clefts. I had the dental medical background, but I needed to get experience. And so this was a great opportunity for me. My wife is a pediatric nurse background, and she was a lot more altruistic than I probably at the origin of it. And so she, went with me as a nurse, and we actually brought the oldest of our 5 children, who was 13 at the time. She was my scrub nurse. And my wife taught her how to be a scrub nurse at this 13-year-old, and we journeyed off halfway around the world. We landed in Manila. The musty smell of a tropical country. I had never been to Asia before in my life, and here we were halfway around the world, get out of the plane at 6:30 in the morning, get on a bus to go to the hotel, and cross a little bridge over a stagnant canal. And I saw the shanty homes, and it registered with me. And as I looked closer, I started to see a couple of women crouched down that were cleaning vegetables that they would later feed to their kids. And I thought to myself, man, that is disgusting. But literally moments later, I was in a 5-star hotel drinking rum swizzles in the pool. And I've often thought, where would we be if I had gone to there as a tourist? I would have probably stayed in a nice hotel, maybe gone to see Imelda Marcos's, 3,000 shoes, and then, gone down maybe to Legazpi to see one of the most perfect volcanic peaks in the world, the Mayon volcano, rice paddies in the foreground, peasants planting rice, plowing fields, kind of an angelic setting. I would have come back to the United States. Somebody would have said to me, well, what's a developing country like? I said, it's beautiful. Well, what about the poverty? There's poverty everywhere. There's poverty in Norfolk, Virginia, New York, DC, LA. I mean, I wouldn't even thought too much about it. But what I had a chance to see in that setting was not just the smiling faces every place that I turned my camera. I had a chance to literally see 300 kids that came at us. Every single one of those kids with parents. Every single one of those parents tugging at our sleeve, begging us to take care of their kid. Every kid with this gaping hole in the lip and roof of their mouth. They couldn't eat, they couldn't speak an intelligible word. And we could only operate on 40 kids that first year. Watched over 250 kids get sent away without anything. I knew the group that we were with wasn't going back. And there was a lady who came up to me with a ripe basket of bananas cradled in her arms. Her daughter aside, maybe 8 years old, big hole in her lip. And she said, I'd like to give these bananas to you as a gift. It's the only thing I have. But it's a gift for trying to take care of my daughter, even though we turned her daughter away. She had tears coming down her cheeks. We had tears coming down our cheeks. I remember the night before, the lady who was the head of the hospital said, someday if you can come back, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, please come back, because these kids will still be here. They'll just be 5 or 10 years older. And she didn't say that with any anger or hostility. That was just reality. And so we felt horribly guilty. And Kath and I said, well, why don't we get together a group of our friends? We'll go back, we'll take care of those kids, the world will be wonderful, our guilt will be ridden, and then we'll just go back to our lives as usual. I swear to you, that's exactly how Operation Smile began. Because we could see that in as little as 45 minutes, you could take a child from hopelessness to possibility. We also started to realize that in doing so, we changed the way that we looked at life and the way that we understood how fortunate that we were. And we realized the friendships that are created. The strongest bonds of friendships get forged in the service of others. You and I may have very little in common, but if we work side by side to help a third person, we'll become friends. And it just is magic, the way it happens. Then I thought to all of the academics that I had been through in my life, and I started to realize that knowledge and science are crucial, of course, but knowledge alone will never suffice. It has no heart. No amount of knowledge will ever nurture or sustain your spirit. It'll never provide you ultimate happiness or peace. It's only when our knowledge is infused with intense energy and passion that knowledge has a chance to come to life. I really started to understand that better after all these years of education. I also started to realize that the bottom line is reason leads to conclusions, but it's emotion that leads to action. We can understand things, we can have a long list of analytical things that we evaluate, but it's not till we get touched emotionally in one way or another that we're called into action, that our adrenaline really starts pumping and we do something that's outside the box, that's extraordinary. I knew that we could do that through these kids. And I knew that it was bigger than just plastic surgery, that it was not just cleft surgery. It had to be bigger than that, because it was that totality of that experience that was so dramatic to us. I'll never forget this fellow. He was about 35 years old. I literally took care of him under the light of day on a stretcher in a hallway with some Novocaine like you would use in a dental office. About 45 minutes later, I walked him back to see his mom. And when she looked at him, she said, "That's not my son." And so I said, "Of course it's your son." She said, "No, it's not." And so I took a mirror that I had out of my pocket and I showed it to him. And when he looked at it, he began to cry. I've often thought, what would it be like to go through 35 years of your life and never be able to whistle? What would it be like to go through 35 years of your life and to never feel the gentleness of a kiss because someone doesn't have 45 minutes for you? There's just no equity in that. It's just not fair. And when we think about what can we do to help another human being, and you figure that in such a short period of time, you can change their life forever. Then you start to ask yourself, why am I not doing that? Especially when it makes me better. And I think that as all of us go through our lives, we start to realize that it's not just what we learn, so to speak. It's how we apply what we learn. It's how do we use what we learn to become a better person totally, not just in our medical environment. Just become a better husband, a better mom, a better dad. That 13-year-old daughter that I told you about, she was literally my scrub nurse. And in the beginning, she felt that she was going to faint when she saw me put needles in somebody's face. And so she said to herself, very wisely, turn away when he's doing that. She eventually became accommodated to it, and you know, she was handing me instruments and things like that. About the fourth day, I reached around to get an instrument off the tray. She said, Dad, let's get something straight. I know where everything is on this table. You ask me for it, I'll give it to you, but don't touch my table. It didn't take her very long to figure out what a Mayo stand was and to feel ownership of it. But it was the beauty of that 13-year-old kid who then came back to her high school, who got a couple of her buddies to start raising money to help us. And now there's 950 high schools involved with Operation Smile nationally. We have an annual conference every year of leadership for high school kids. We bring 2 high school kids on every single trip with a student sponsor. Because through medicine, we have an opportunity to introduce them to the reality of our world. And I can tell you that it's one of the most powerful things that we've had the opportunity to do. And it's amazing how these kids gravitate. A couple of years ago, we did the conference in Beijing. Within 2 days, 800 kids signed up from 23 countries. Jackie Chan ended it for us, which was remarkable. It was just spectacular. But when you even think of Jackie Chan, he was with us in Vietnam for our 20th anniversary in Vietnam. And I said, come on, Jackie, let's go into the operating room and you can help me. He said, no, I can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do it? No, I can't. I said, Jackie, you're not afraid of blood, are you? He says, I don't know. I said, wow, he said, I faint when I get needles. I said, no, Jackie Chan faints when he gets needles. I can't believe it. I said, well, come on in, don't you worry, I'll protect you. And I said to him, just turn away, I'll tell you when to turn away. And so he got used to it. Halfway through the case, man, he was into it. He was totally into it. Carried this baby back to a mom. He went from midnight to 3 a.m. He texted his buddies, telling them about that experience. That's what you and I do every day, and we forget it. It was one of the most dramatic, impacting moments of his life. That's why when we called him and said, would you come and, do the finale for these 800 kids, he said, sure. It is amazing the power that we have in medicine if we realize how powerful it is, but we forget. I'll never forget when I met this young man. It was one of our first years in the Philippines, and he had come in to get screened. I was in the operating room. Someone said to me, did you see that kid outside? Terrible problem, he said. He's missing his nose and upper lip. And I said, well, why don't we see if we can get him back, and maybe there's something we can do to help him. So on the radio, they said, well, the boy with the blue bandana was at the Cameron Sore Hospital, come back. His uncle heard it, brought him back that afternoon. I had a chance to see him. And he was a frightened 16-year-old kid. At 13, he had quit school, wore this bandana around, and he had NOMA, malnutrition and infection cankermoris, that is associated with malnutrition, lack of antibiotics, and it's an ulceration that continues to go. And I said to him, well, I can't take care of it here, but let's see what we can do, and I'll see if I can get you to the States to take care of you. For 6 months, I was totally unsuccessful until a businessman came into my office. I showed Eddie Ontero's picture, and he said, well, that's no problem. He says, I can fly him over here tomorrow. But logistically, it's a bit of a problem. So let's go up and see our senator in Washington. It was Paul Tribble at the time. Next day, we fly up on Eddie's plane, land in Washington, go into Paul Tribble's office. Any of you who have been to Washington know that it's not instantaneously that the senator's going to stay with you for a while. And so we got into Paul Tribble's office. Literally within minutes, Paul Tribble was there. I knew then that Eddie had contributed significantly to Paul's campaign. He said, Eddie, I'm behind this, my family's behind this, I'd really appreciate it if you could help us. Paul Tribble said, that's no problem. On the Senate Commerce Committee, Pan Am owes me a favor. He says, I'll call the ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador Bosworth, we'll get him a visa. Boom, within 2 weeks, this kid was in Norfolk, Virginia. Now, why was he there in 2 weeks? Because of Eddie and the politician. And why wasn't I successful? It was pretty obvious that I didn't have that kind of power. This was Ontario when we first had a chance to see him. This was Ontario after we reconstructed his nose and upper lip. And I can tell you that as a surgeon, that was gratifying. But I can tell you that one of the most dramatic times that I've had was when we went back with him to his home. We walked down a long, muddy road, and hundreds of kids followed him. He was the hero. He was the kid who came halfway around the world. He climbed a coconut tree to get us down something to drink. Brought his water buffalo in from the field so that we could take pictures on it. Introduced us to his family, all who lived in a little nipa hut on a dirt floor. For our 10th anniversary in the Philippines, we went back and visited Ontario again. We walked down that same muddy road, and hundreds of kids were still there around him. Climbed the same coconut tree to get us something to drink. Brought the same water buffalo in from the field so that we could take pictures on it. And reintroduced us to his family, who still all lived in that same dirt floor nipa hut. But this time, he introduced us to his wife and his little 9-month-old baby that he could have never had if it hadn't been for the businessman, if it hadn't been for the political leader, and if it hadn't been for hundreds of people that I didn't even know their names, that decided that the dignity of one kid's life was worth their efforts. To me, that was the beauty of what Operation Smile had the opportunity to aggregate. Now, I can tell you that I really believe that children are powerful. They're powerful beyond anything that you and I have the ability to understand or to create. So let me tell you a little thing that brings me back to Fordham Prep. It was our 25th high school reunion, and I was down at the Water Club sharing a beer with a buddy of mine from high school, John Connor. We were sitting there, and it literally was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and John Connor was a veteran of Vietnam. He was over there right after he came out of college. And he said to me, you know, Bill, I've come back, I'm on Wall Street, been very, very successful, but I'm very involved with the Veterans Associations, and I know General Vesey, who at that time was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Reagan. He said, I know that he's been trying to get the MIAs back to the United States for years, and he's been unsuccessful. He said, you know, I think that if you could bring Operation Smile to Vietnam, I think that that may really soften and create a trust in a relationship. I said, John, I'm more than glad to if we can, but you have to understand that at that time, it was really touchy to go back to Vietnam, very strong veteran groups. I mean, this was almost 25 years ago now. So in August of 1988, we went back, 5 of us, to Vietnam. And it was a really dramatic experience for me because there was nothing but bicycles, basically, on the street. $160 per capita income. Really poor. They only had electricity 2 hours a day. And so it was in that environment we stayed in the government guest house. And one of the 5 of us was my 16-year-old son, who was quite the rascal. And I needed to get him out of the house and away from his environment for a little while. So I brought him over with me. And, you know, any of you who have had teenage sons, you know it's not the easiest thing to find things that you want to communicate jointly about. And so here we were in the government guest house, and he's whispering, do you think they're tapping us? Do you think they listen? I'm sure they are. And, you know, so here we were, the first Americans, basically, to go back after the war. We had to get our visas in Bangkok. We didn't have diplomatic relations. And we met with General Giap. We met with Phan Dong. We met with all the leaders of Vietnam through Vesey to talk about doing something together and to helping one another. We were there, you know, and met the kids. We were there. John Connor, that was the Hanoi Hilton at the time, getting a picture by the Hanoi Hilton. And it was just an unbelievable experience because I felt sorry for diplomats. They sit jet-lagged around a cold, dark table through an interpreter trying to communicate their message, which they already have a preconceived idea of what these people are, quote, like. And then they spend, you know, a couple of days there. They come back probably with the same attitude that they had in the beginning, which is the way I was. I wasn't sure I liked them. I didn't think that they liked me. And the proposition was on the table is we can bring a team over here to take care of kids with cleft lip and cleft palate. They had told me at the time that since 1951, They had operated on 1,000 kids with clefts in Vietnam. This was the head of plastic surgery in Vietnam. Wonderful, wonderful guy named Dr. Phan. So it was just unbelievable to me. I mean, here's a country of, at that time, 60 million people. If 1 in 500 kids in Vietnam had a cleft, which is about what it is, you're talking about 120,000 people with clefts, and they had operated on 1,000 kids. And so, I mean, there was obviously a tremendous need. To my surprise, really, they invited us back, and so 3 months later, February of 1989, we went over for the first time. There were 7 veterans on the trip with us that went into the Olive Palm Hospital in Hanoi. And during the first trip, one of the things that I did is visit Ho Chi Minh City. And this was an emblem that I got from a nurse. It was the Barsky Institute. And this is exactly what she gave me, along with the picture of the Barsky Institute. She took me aside, quietly said, "Could you walk over here outside with me?" I said, "Sure." She said, "I've been keeping this for 20 years. I've hidden it because I've hidden it. I've hidden it because I didn't realize that anybody would be coming, and I was afraid to show it to anybody that I kept it because I would get in trouble. But I'll never forget the days that Dr. Barsky and the Americans were here helping us." And if you think of that, this nurse for 20 years had an impression of the United States through Dr. Barsky and Dr. Silver, who was over there at the time, and the other Americans who had came over to help them. It was incredible. And I've always kept that medal in my desk drawer to remind me how powerful this was. So to be asked to give a Barsky lecture is really quite incredible to me. And when I think about it, when we went back in 1989, February of 1989, this gal Ann Hewitt was a great, great nurse, real good sense of humor and everything. And it was around Valentine's Day, and she brought all these sticky hearts with her. This was Dr. Tu, and a little Vietnamese doctor, wonderful guy. And every day when he would come into the operating room, she would say, "Dr. Tu, you've been such a good boy. I'm going to give you a little red sticky heart." And he would put it on his scrub gown. Well, this was day 3. He would always take off his little, scrub gown top, keep it. The next day he would get another heart. As we went to leave after 5 days of operating, I'll never forget, we were walking up to the plane and on the tarmac. The surgeons that we were with were standing on the tarmac waving goodbye to us. And Dr. Tu opened his coat, and on his white shirt were 5 sticky hearts. It was an incredible moment in my life. But one of the toughest moments in my life also occurred on that 5th day that we were operating. I was asked to give a talk in a crowded cafeteria, about 300 people, to talk to the Vietnamese that were there that were helping us in the hospital. John Connor was on that first trip with us, but the day before the second trip, he called me on the phone. He said, "Bill," he said, "I'd love to be going with you tomorrow to take care of those kids in Vietnam." He said, "But we're both packing our bags tonight. You're packing your bags to help the kids in Vietnam. I'm packing my bags to go to the hospital to be treated for my Agent Orange lymphoma." I knew that had impacted me, but I didn't realize how much until that 5th day, and I wanted to acknowledge John's importance to this whole thing. So I started to tell that story of the telephone call. And when I did, my throat tightened, I couldn't speak. Tears were just pouring down my cheeks, and there was terminal silence in the room. And Dr. Phan stood up, and he said, "My father died in the war. My brother died in the war. I never, ever thought I would talk to an American, no less work side by side with one. Isn't it time that we put the war behind us and get on with our lives?" I'm telling you, man, it was one of the most impacting moments in my life. I can also tell you that 3 months later, the MIAs started coming back to the United States. We've done a documentary on that, and General Vesey, who's still alive, was interviewed, and he attributes the fact that those MIAs came back because of Operation Smile. And he called me a few years ago, and he said, "Bill, I don't know if I told you, but I was over in Vietnam with President Clinton, and we were, there, and we were talking about things and given different lectures and luncheons and everything, and a general came up to me and he said, General Vesey, I don't know if you know me, but I'm General so-and-so. I fought against you years ago in Vietnam in such and such a battle. And he said, and I don't know if you remember me, but it was a bad day for me. We lost a lot of men. And General Vesey said, yeah, I remember the battle very well. It wasn't a good day for us. Also, we lost a lot of men. He said, but that's not why I came over to shake your hand. I came over to shake your hand because I have a sister who had a child that was born with a bad facial deformity. And I understand that you're the person that brought Operation Smile to Vietnam. He says, without you, today my family wouldn't be whole. And General Vesey said that at that time, the tears started coming down the general's cheeks. And General Vesey was there shaking his hands with this guy who had been mortal enemies 20 plus years ago. And here they were, simpatico, that moment in time. Children are incredible, what they can do. Absolutely incredible. The strongest bonds of friendship get forged in the service of others. And General Vesey had a chance to show me. John Connor died a number of years, 1992, 4 years after we took that first trip, of his Agent Orange lymphoma. And I had become very, very good friends with him, and I was asked to give the eulogy at his funeral, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my life. And at the burial ground, as the Star-Spangled Banner kind of, blew over the waveside as the last bars of the Star-Spangled Banner, echoed there as the last, bits of the 12-gun salute went off, I realized what an incredible gift this friend had given me. He really had shown me the pure meaning of love. Love, by definition, is self-sacrifice. Love is a decision to make somebody else's problem your problem. John Connor loved this country. He was willing to fight for it and ultimately die for it. But he loved people enough that he was willing to go back to that same country and help those kids. What a wonderful gift this friend gave me. And I will never, ever forget those exposures to Vietnam because of him. Because just like in the Barsky Institute, it gave you an opportunity to be able to shine that light. Now, I can tell you that there's all sorts of things that have happened since then. But one of the most amazing things is that 16-year-old little troublemaker that I went with, 20 years later, adopted a little Vietnamese child from Vietnam. You can never, ever tell when you're going to impact your kid and what it's going to do to take that. But it is miraculous what happens when you give kids an experience that's outside their comfort zone at an early age. So I say to each of you, as you go through your life with your families, don't hesitate to bring them into what you're doing, because what you're doing is powerful, powerful stuff. So in the end, you can't be afraid to think big, because thinking big is what's going to grow. You've got to think outside the box. But it's tough to think outside the box because you can't prove that what you're going to do is right until you do it. So you can take a hefty amount of criticism for doing things that are different. In about 1999, we were getting into the turn of the century, and there's a book that was written that's called Built to Last, and it's by a guy named Jim Collins. He's a business writer. And he has a concept in there that all the great companies had. It's called BHAGs, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals. And all the great companies have done this intuitively. And so we were starting to think, well, what can we do to grow the organization? Because you have to stress an organization to get everybody ready for a platform that's ready for growth. If you don't stress the organization and build that platform before your growth, you're going to be unsuccessful with it. So we said, well, why don't we do something that's outside the box for the turn of the century? And why don't we dream even bigger? So what we did is we ended up raising about $10 million to go to 18 countries in 9 weeks, operate on 5,300 kids, and we leased an L-1011 flying hospital to be able to do it. Now, what our concept was in that was that we were going to buy equipment and supplies for every country if they promised to do 1 kid a day when we were gone. And we set that up ahead of time. I raised $7 million from one man that if I would have gone to him and said, would you fund one trip, $150,000, it wouldn't have been big enough for him. But he had enough money that asking him to do this thing was within his thought process. It was exciting for him. So I raised $7 million from him, $1 million from Ronald McDonald House Charities, $1 million from Johnson & Johnson, $1 million from Warner Lambert at the time. And we took off on that. Our thought is that the presidents of countries will see this plane coming in and want to come onto it. That will help brand us in the countries. The business people will want to come onto it. That will help brand us in the countries. And we'll accomplish something in doing that by giving equipment and supplies and saying to people, you got to do kids when we're gone for sustainability. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. When we started doing that, the presidents of countries did come onto the plane. And they did, come on now, turn for me, buddy. They did, come there, and they did operate with us. And if you take a look at 1999 on this chart here, and take a look at the red that follows it, that was the in-country surgeries that were being done after we did this. But it was because of the BHAG that we were able to do it, that we were able to brand the organization in those countries that allowed us to do that. Now 60% of the work that we do is done by in-country people when we're not there, by funds that they raise in country. Vietnam next year will raise $2.5 million in their country to continue the work that they do day in and day out. It is amazing what people will do if you give them the education and the equipment to do it, not just in medicine, but on the business side of it. So then we started to think of, well, what are we going to do, as our 25th anniversary comes around? And we said, well, why don't we go to 25 countries simultaneously? And on November 7, 2007, we landed 1,900 volunteers in 40 sites in 25 countries. We operated on 4,000 plus kids in 10 days. And what was our goal for that? Our goal for that was the fact that we wanted to create centers that were permanent year-round to be able to take care of kids. But again, we raised $6 million of those dollars from one man, the same guy that gave us the $7 million to be able to do it. And it was incredible what it was, because now of the 1,900 volunteers, 1,200 were from 43 other countries around the world that we could have never had if we hadn't done the thing in 1999 where we gave them the equipment and supplies. So one feeds on the next, and it set us up for the next thing. And so the green that you'll see on the map is now the centers that have developed since that time. We now have 30 centers of one fashion or another throughout the world that are operating day after day to take care of kids with cleft lips and cleft palates. But you have to think outside the box. If you don't think outside the box about these things, that change would have never happened. And it was what helped drive us. Now, what was one of those centers? One of them was in Guwahati, in the state of Assam. Guwahati in the state of Assam. Assam is up in the northeast part of India, cradles Bangladesh. It's intensely poor. There were 35 million people in the state and a lot of kids with clefts. And my wife said, Bill, we've really got to go up to Guwahati. They want to make some big announcement. And I said, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we went up there. And literally, we didn't know anything of what it was. We ended up being on a stage that was there in this hospital. And here we were on this podium. Tent was there, 300 people, every news outlet known to man. And what they do is they unveil a cornerstone of a new hospital addition that they're building that we never knew anything about. And not only was the chief minister's name, the minister of health's name, but our personal names, which really worried me because they never said anything to us. And I was right to be worried about it, because minutes later they handed me a MOU to sign, a memorandum of understanding, that said that we agree to take care of 35,000 kids with clefts in the next 2 years. Kath turns to me and says, "Are you going to sign that thing?" I said, "Kath, what option do I have right now?" I said, "Besides," I said, "it's an MOU. I can always say I didn't understand." So we ended up signing it. And bottom line is, seize the moment. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. We got on a plane, went down to Delhi. We had a relationship with Ratan Tata, a big industrialist, very, very wealthy guy that we had a relationship with fundraising-wise down in Delhi. I sat this close to Mr. Tata. I said, "Mr. Tata, the government is going to give us $5 million in putting together this structure. I need another $5 million or I can't make it happen." He said, "That should be no problem." Boom, I had $10 million. I called Stryker because I had a relationship with them. I said, "Get your top man in India up here tomorrow." because I didn't want to get into the vetting and all that stuff and get inferior equipment. I needed the very best equipment. And what I thought is, let's do something that's really outside the box. So literally on a legal pad, we started to put together in my ideal dream what would be my ideal operating room for efficiency and effectiveness in education. And we literally drew it out with them. This is what we had at that moment, but we wanted to make sure it was nothing but the best and was the most ideal thing that we could ever have. And so we ended up literally 6 months later developing this in the operating room. And we were there during the time of the 5,000 smiles, and it was incredible because all of a sudden they redid a ward because they saw what had happened up in the operating room. But what was even more incredible to me is a gardener came up to me and said, you know, I know what you're doing and it's so good for our people. So I decided on my own dime to get flowers that I could put in to make the hospital prettier for everybody when they came here. It's this classic thing, if you build it, they will come. You don't have to say that to them, it just happens. And so this was the situation. If I can get it to go here. Let me do this. I got it. So this was the situation that we had then.
As you can see, the center's up and running in full swing. We have our mission going full speed. We've got 5 tables running. All surgeons are operating. Each camera, which is mounted in the light, is showing the surgical field of each operation that's happening. The goal for this facility is for it to be a center of education for our surgeons here, for partner surgeons in India and worldwide, and for educating all about cleft lip and cleft palate. All of these images can be sent immediately and in real time around the world in teleconferencing to demonstrate and to facilitate educational exchange. So we are up and running.
Now, what has that gained us? In 3 years now, we just did our 10,000th kid in those operating rooms with cleft lip and cleft palate. We've had people coming from all the universities literally around the world to bring residents and fellows there because they can get so much experience in such a short period of time and develop a bond with their mentors. It's been absolutely incredible. And so we're in the process now of looking into other areas that we can develop it. But bottom line is, of all of this stuff, the change starts with you. And it's a very, very easy thing when someone comes up with an idea to say no. It is the worst thing in the world you can do. Someone calls you on the phone and says, you know, Joe or Sally, can you do such and such? And if you say no right away, that's so negative. If you at least say, let me see what I can do about this, even if you have to say no later, they know you tried. But to just say no totally cuts off all creative thinking. So we've always had this thing that's within Operation Smile of a can-do personality versus a can't-do personality. And a response of just say yes to things because it's so critically important to try and do things. In our 20th anniversary in Vietnam, we had a team that went into Laos. And in Laos, with that team, there was a lady who evidently had gotten her hair caught in a rice machine that tore off her scalp. And just by chance, our team came across that. Now, years before, a couple of plastic surgeons from the United States have been spending literally 10 years teaching the Vietnamese about microsurgery in Hanoi. And they happened to be back with us on that 20th anniversary in Hanoi. And here was this lady that obviously needed a free flap for reconstruction. And by chance, our people just came across a scalp in a garbage pail and hunted down this lady in the ICU. Ended up seeing her, and this is a thing that David Chung, who's a wonderful plastic surgeon in Australia, wrote to me about that experience.
When a group of us stand together, it's amazing what can be done. The miracle that Operation Smile is every day. I remember walking in, Nori grabbing my hand urgently, strangely surreal, tired from the days of operating. A devastating accident, insurmountable issues seemingly. What could we do? What was required? How could we do it? My mind ticking and torturing as we walked in. There she sat, a strange resignation in her eyes. her hair stripped from her head. The gasps from nurses and doctors alike as the dressing was removed revealed a skull, the dryness clearly evident. The skull slowly drying and dying. The son looked desperately at us, his palms humbly clenched, his head bowed, begging for his mother's life and welfare. No emotional cries, just a respectful, silent pleading. Whatever comes our way, all we can say is yes. Yes, we can try. A phone call to Jimmy Grotting. Yes, we can do it. A phone call to plastic surgery colleagues we have never met. Yes, we can operate. A chat to the Vietnamese surgeon from Hanoi who was working with us. Yes, we can send her. But there are visa problems. She has no passport, she's so poor. Yes, the government officials will help us. But she can't fly. Yes, the ambulance from the hospital will drive her. It'll take us 24 hours, but yes, we will accompany her all day, all night. We don't have the money. Team Laos, raise that money. Just say yes. A wave of energy and emotion carried her to where she needed to be. So often in our lives we are powerless. Today we are powerful. To change the life of another fellow soul, to do all we can to make it happen. One life changed, that's all. But how precious is one life? And how much more does that one life affect other lives? Even more our own. Not thanks to any one person, but thanks to a collective energy. What an amazing thing to watch it happen. It was going to happen. A chain of hands that passed this dear woman from a place where she would have been left to die to a place where strangers could help her just because there was a need to do something. That's what life's about. Thanks, Operation Smile. Another life changed. No names, strange faces, and love.
So today, we're at about 220,000 kids we've taken care of. We have 5,500 medical volunteers. We'll put 180 trips together this year into the developing world. And it's just incredible because the statistics that you see are just the beginning of what really has the ability, because we have the ability with research and education to do incredible things that are outside the surgical realm. We have a relationship with the American Heart Association to teach PALS, ACLS, and BLS, and to credential people and give them the American Heart Association certification of trainers as well as people that we train. We'll do that in about 30 countries. We have 80 participants who are helping train now with baby breathing. We're doing nutritional studies. We have 130 residents that'll go on trips this year and 18 fellowships that will entertain throughout it. But it's all because of this collective energy of so many people that it's allowed to happen. And I think that for you and I, the take home is there aren't enough doctors in the world to take care of all the need that exists in the world. So we've started to put together just the reality of the situation. In Brazil, 191 million people almost. If you take a look at the fact that there's about 215 doctors that are taking care of clefts, and if every one of those doctors kept up with the needs that existed to take care of the backlog, each of them would have had to do over 2,000 kids with clefts and be willing to do almost 300 kids a year. That flat out is not happening. Every year it gets further behind. If you take a look at then the northeast part of Brazil, the numbers even become more ridiculous. 53 million people, every one of them would have had to do over 5,800 cases to keep up with the backlog, and another 92 cases every year to keep up with the kids that are being born. There's about 16,000 kids in the northeast part of Brazil in the state of Ceará that have never, ever had a cleft operation. It's just impossible. If you take a look at Mexico, you got the same statistics, 50 surgeons taking care of it. Each of them would have had to do almost 5,000 kids to have kept up with that backlog. If you take a look at Ethiopia, there's one surgeon basically that's doing clefts who would have had to have done 44,000, almost 2,000 a year to keep up with it. There just is not enough human beings. India, ridiculous numbers. And in the state of Assam, here's the numbers that we were faced with when we first went there. The reality is that if you train as much as you and I have trained or anybody trains, they are not going to stay in a village outside of the big city at the very least, or go to another country to make a better living. They deserve that. They've worked hard for that. They are not going to stay there. 1 out of every 10 women in Madagascar die during childbirth age of childbirth. Think of the amount of orphans, vesicovaginal, rectovaginal fistulas, deformities that occur because of the lack of an OBGYN person. Think of the fact that we now have ultrasound. We now have the ability to predict it. We have the ability to train people to do these things if we can think outside the box and stop thinking that we always have to have a surgeon trained to our capacity to take care of it. If we continue to think that way, we are never going to address the surgical needs in the developing world. That is just the reality that we have to come to. And in the end, who's the hero to take care of all this? Well, I can remember very, very graphically the story of this gal who came in Kenya. She came into the hospital in Kisumu, and my wife happened to be there at the time with 2 donors of ours that came out of Chicago. But it really didn't start there. It really started when our son Billy, who's a plastic surgeon right now, was in dental school. He's out at LA Children's now doing clefts, and he had a buddy of his, Pete Coletti. I don't have to tell you New Yorkers what a classic New Yorker is like. For those outside of New York, you've learned what it's like. But Pete Coletti was this classic Italian kid from New York City, Long Island actually. And he was a dentist out in Chicago. And one day he called me, he says, "Hey doc, I got this lady in a chair and I'm working her. She just won $186 million in the lottery." He says, "When the time is right, I'll tell you." I said, "Pete, thanks. Give me a call when the time is right." 2 weeks later, he gives me a call. "Doc, the time is right. You give her a call. Her name is Sue Keynes, and she's ready for your call." So I give her a call. Dialed her up. She answered the phone. I said, "Sue, this is Bill Magee. Pete Coletti told me to give you a call. And I'm kind of embarrassed because I'm sure a lot of people are calling you. And if you want to hang up, it's okay." I did say that, but I did not mean that. And she said, no, I'd really like to help you." And so it was a result of that she and her husband were over in Kisumu when this mother and child came in with a blanket over the kid's face and looking lost. And my wife and these 2 people said, "Is there any way that we can help you?" She takes the blanket off this kid's face, and there she is. The woman was 5 days postpartum, had come 5 hours on a bus because she was told it was the only way for her kid to stay alive. And as they saw, they knew that they couldn't do anything there, but the Keyneses left $5,000 for the medical care and said, "When the time is right, you let us know and we'll help bring her to the States to get taken care of." So when the child was 1.5 years old, that's when I saw her, and we ended up doing a 14-hour operation with the hypertelorism. And when the mom saw her in the recovery room, she looked at the bracelet on the hand to make sure it was her child. She couldn't believe it was her child. And there were the Keyneses. They were the millionaires who had invested in all of this and have been very generous to us in the background. But bottom line is, why did this kid go from there to there to here, 7th in her class of 27 kids, because of the work that who did? And if one were to think about this and say, why did she have the opportunity to get to there? And as the surgeon, if you were to say, well, it was because of me, you are in dreamland if you think that that's the truth. Because, well, the surgeon spent 14 hours trying to reconstruct this kid. The anesthesiologist kept trying to keep him alive because the surgeons were trying to kill him. If it wasn't for a great blood bank, it couldn't have happened. If it wasn't for great nurses, it couldn't have happened. It wasn't great for great instrumentation, it could have happened. It couldn't have happened without the pediatric facility. It couldn't have happened without the pediatric ICU. It couldn't have happened without the pediatric intensivists and ICU nurses. It couldn't have happened without a myriad of people that allowed this kid's life to change. That's the reality. We all need each other. We all have different talents. There is no one hero. And I think that it's important for us to humbly realize what we're good at, but to be humble enough to know what we're not good at and embrace people who have those talents. And so I would say in closing, use your gifts. Use the gifts that you had. This graphically came home to me in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia a couple of years ago. I was on the second floor of the hospital in Addis Ababa, 2,000-bed structure, cachectic bodies laying everywhere. People came to the hospital literally to die. We had 1,000 kids show up to get surgery for clefts. It was one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen. And there wasn't a bathroom that I could ever find or a shower I could ever find. They just didn't exist in that institution. On the second floor landing of that hospital, I met these three men. They were three boys of a 7-member family. The mother had died a couple of years before. The father remarried and ostracized the 17-year-old and the 7-year-old because he felt that they were a curse on the family because they had clefts. Basically, the 7-year-old still had his spirit. He could still smile. He could still look you in the eyes. But the 17-year-old, he was toast. He wore a mask over his face, his baseball cap pulled over his eyes. And I walked up to him on that second floor landing and I said to him, "Do me a favor," I said, "shake my hand." And as he ended up shaking my hand, I said, "No, squeeze my hand." And he squeezed it a little bit tighter. I said, "No, really squeeze my hand." And he finally squeezed it pretty well after about 30 seconds. I said, "Now, would you look me in the eyes?" And as he went to look me in the eyes, his hand went limp again. I said, "No, squeeze my hand and look me in the eyes, both at the same time." Finally, after about 30 seconds, we got that down. I then said to him, "Look, I can promise you tomorrow that we can fix your lip. What I can't promise you is that we can heal your spirit. You got to do that. So let's start looking at life differently. Let's start realizing that your cleft lip is your gift. You've been given the gift of a cleft lip because forever you'll be more sensitive to the needs of people in your country that have problems like this than most people. So we'll make a deal. You promise me you'll use your gift for the rest of your life. I'll promise you that we'll fix your lip tomorrow." Every single one of us in this room has been given a gift. Every one of those gifts are different. It's how we use our gifts that are going to make a difference in our lives, the lives of our family, the lives of our community, and our country around us. We have the ability to create change in our world. And children are the only language that all of us have in common. Medicine is a powerful vehicle, and their combination has the ability to unite nations and people. I am sure that that is true. So I say to you that in the 31 years since my wife Kathy and I began Operation Smile, we have found that there are thousands and thousands of people who are all people should be. Selfless, kind, warm-hearted, full of generous impulses. It's these people who change our world. Without them, there would be no Operation Smile. It's difficult to put in only a few words, but these individuals seek neither recognition nor reward, but continue year after year to afford the healing of their sympathies and a home in their heart for the world's neglected and forgotten children. So when I say, God bless you, you faithful friends of mankind, I mean bless you. There's no one here among us who has known the compassion of a newfound friend's embrace or the gentle touch of a stranger's hand, but in their hearts would add, amen. Thank you.